Thank you so much. All right, everyone, welcome to my session called Productivity Through User Adoption in 7 Steps. In this session, I'm going to talk about how to do a better implementation of Microsoft Teams, how to avoid the pitfalls, most common pitfalls, and make your end users more happy, increase usage of the application, and so on. In this case, I am focusing on Microsoft Teams, but could actually apply to any other implementation as well. All right. So, just some quick facts about myself. My name is Adam Deltinger. I'm a senior IT consultant at ITS Sweden in Malmo. I'm also an Office Services and Apps MVP as well. Mostly focuses on Microsoft Teams, of course, but also other services within the Microsoft 365 stack. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. You can see my information down there, so feel free to do that, or if you have any questions afterwards and so on. Before I start off, I just want to say a big thank you to all the sponsors that made this event possible. So yeah, thanks for making this happen. Also, please go in. You can see a link here. They are giving away 3 Oculus Quest all-in-ones. If you go into the link here, you can get more information about it, and it's kind of a questionnaire about the event itself, and you can read more information on the event homepage. So please do that, so you get a chance to win. All right. Being an employee myself for many years, I have many times received kind of an email saying, hey, we got this new application rolling out. It's great. There may be some info and a link to click to some documentation and maybe some how-to guides. This can apply to all sorts of apps and services like time reporting tools, ticket management systems, or, for example, Microsoft Teams. So later on, the application is rolled out, and I found myself these times that myself never really keen to use them. It's almost felt like I was being forced to use them. Each time I had to look for that each time I had to use this application, I had to look for the email on how to do things, or even worse, maybe ask a coworker for the 6th time what button to click or how to do things. So it's kind of like I use this application because I had to, not really because I wanted to. So why did this happen? Am I a lazy person? Yes, for sure I am, but there's more to it. Because no one really told me how this app or whatever upgrade it could be or whatever benefited me and my work. I'm sure this tool was better, had better features and so on, but no one really told me about them or even gave me an interest of finding them out for myself. So when I'm talking about adoption here, though, what do I mean by end user adoption? Because it's a very common word nowadays. It's kind of a buzzword, and Microsoft is focusing very heavily on it, creating tons of great content around this for you to use. And why now? If you look back some years ago, we had a more easily controlled work environment, right? People had a computer and at their desktop with a bunch of group policy objects, maybe, and limiting what users could do. Then there was the corporate firewalls, which control what services and data we could use both externally and internally. It was easy for IT departments to make us use the tools and services they wanted us to use, basically. Nowadays, we have something called, the digital workplace, modern workplace, and so on, right? So not all, but many users have a bunch of mobile devices, all connected to internet and have access to thousands of apps and services. And I mean, people can work from anywhere, and it's getting harder for organizations to control these devices. And of course, you can manage and govern mobile devices too, but many times you should, and many times you actually should do this, but more in the sense of a security and governance perspective. Not forcing users into using your applications. And it's clear that it's far more easy to have your users wanting to use your application actually, instead of restricting them to only be able to do that. I mean, end users will always find other ways, right? That's why we have the term shadow IT, for example. Users will be one step ahead, and IT departments will need to put so much into so much effort into keeping up, basically. So what we need to do instead is to make our users aware of our application, then gain their interest and curiosity about it. Then we use it, and our goal is that they will like using it, and even better, love it, telling other people about it as well. When we come to this, we have succeeded, and this is what kind of end user adoption is to me, right? So before I go into step number one here, I just want to say that each one of these steps will take time and effort to complete. But I promise that if you do all or some of these steps, at least some of these steps, your chances of success is going to be great, right? So let's move on to step number one then. So collect important information. So there can never be too much information, right? In order to do this, you need to find your adoption stakeholders and do workshops with them. And with adoption stakeholders, I refer to people within your organization that knows about your company, that knows about your values, the culture, your processes, and most importantly, your pains. So you need to know why you're rolling out Microsoft Teams in the first place. When I help customers and ask them these questions, two reasons come up pretty often. They might say like, we use Microsoft 365 for our mail, and we want to start using other services as well within the suite that we already kind of pay for, right? And we hear Microsoft Teams is great. Another one can be we use Skype for Business online, and that will go end of life. So Teams is kind of replacing Skype, so we need to make a move because next year it's going to be removed, right? So these are all valid reasons, of course, but they don't really answer the most important. They don't answer the most important questions. So also from an end user perspective, they don't really care about this as well. They want to know how they can benefit from something if they're going to learn a new application. So kind of we can say, what's in it for me? So in these workshops, you need to ask yourself these things. Why use Teams? Is Teams the solution? What parts of Teams do you need, and in what order are we going to implement them? And the next question is kind of this is where the next question comes in, and that is the pains. So your adoption stakeholders should be able to tell the pains you and your end users are struggling with. Make sure to identify those and how Teams can help resolve those pains. Next are the quick wins and long-term goals. Quick wins are very important because they help end users getting excited and interested in the product. If you identify a user pain within your organization and Teams somehow can help solve these problems without much investment, this is a quick win. For example, if your users are struggling with meetings today, and we know that Teams now is a great tool to conduct meetings with a lot of features like meeting recordings, meeting notes, simplicity of joining, and so on. So all this is right there, built in, ready for your users to start using. So this is a quick win. Find all these and give the users the what's in it for me I mentioned earlier. Also make sure that to set the long-term goals as well. What is it that you want with this implementation? What do you want this implementation to accomplish, right? That's an important note. So step number 2 is conducting a pilot. Running a pilot is an important step towards having a successful rollout. And how extensive it needs to be depends on the size of the rollout, the number of users, number of scenarios you have to test, and so forth. It might also be done in different steps depending on if you're doing a full rollout off the bat or in sequences as well. There might also be more than one pilot group too. So this needs to be addressed, right, during the previous workshop, or sit down and have a new one regarding the pilot itself. And doing a pilot is important because you need to know what works and what does not work. Because implementing Teams fully, not knowing this, will probably end up with unsatisfied end users as well. So Now I'm going to talk about my take on what a pilot is about. Uh, Also be aware that Microsoft have lots of great content on how to set up and run a pilot, so make sure you dig into that as well. So first of all, pilot a scenario with the most common variables to the organization as a whole, meaning the thing you try out during the pilot should be something that most of your users will be using. Doing a pilot on how salespersons can work more efficiently with leads, for example, would benefit your sales departments, right? But won't do much for the rest of your users. So here, try to find common ways of work that applies to the masses, so to speak. If you have business processes or business units that have very particular processes and way of working, it might be a good idea to make this a separate pilot, for example. So depending on if you're doing one or several pilots, you need to make sure that you have the right pilot users too. And if you are doing only one pilot, I'd say it's a good idea to have users from all different parts of your organization. This way you will find that most do's and don'ts, you'll find all the most do's and don'ts and will be prepared for a full implementation after this. So you also have to give your pilot user appropriate training as well. They don't need to be experts, but receive good enough training to fulfill their day-to-day work. So kind of in the way you have intended. So in the pilot, you should try out all the quick wins you have found during the initial workshops as well. Try to resolve the pains I was talking about earlier with the help of Microsoft Teams. So overall, get feedback throughout the pilot and adjust accordingly. What works and what does not work. Some intended ways of working might not cut it. So then you have to go back to the drawing board and try again, right? Microsoft Teams is an awesome service that does a lot, but it does not do everything. And sometimes you find that Teams is just not suitable for what you need. So I also recommend collecting the most common questions you are asked during the pilot as well, because we will use them later on. So just to summarize this step, make sure to pilot the right things and also having the right users as pilot users. Make sure to try out every scenario and adjust till it just works. So we'll now come to step number 3, which is communication. I'd say this is one of the most important steps and shouldn't be underestimated. It's also important to note that this step is something you do from start to finish during the implementation, or even better yet, continues on even afterwards. So remember that email I was talking about in the beginning. That's communication, right? But although not a very good one, and it's far from enough. Communicating with your end users about what's going on, how, when, and why is a foundation of good user adoption. As stated earlier, communication is something that's supposed to happen before, during, and even after rollout. And once again, Microsoft have made lots of great material and content for you to use here as well. Email templates, flyers, best practices examples, and so on. And I've been talking about getting the end users invested in your rollout, right? And in the product you're implementing. One big part of this is communication. Start informing users about Microsoft Teams ahead of time. What is it? What will the implementation look like? Then you describe why you roll out Microsoft Teams and what the high-level gains and benefits are. So then you also explain the personal benefits of Microsoft Teams, the what's in it for me part. You need to get your users interested and create curiosity for Microsoft Teams. Here's also where those pains and quick wins we talked about earlier also comes into play yet again. If you can pinpoint an issue a user have and give them a solution for this, you have come a long way. So during the rollout, keep users aware of what's going on and don't leave them in the dark. Keep building their interest and make them feel that they are involved and not forced into something. And furthermore, Teams is an ever-evolving service, which means that new features are being released all the time. Many of these may improve teamwork, save time, and help users be more effective and productive. So make sure to keep your users in the loop always. So my next step applies to this as well. And the 4th step is continuous learning. This follows the same track as communication, actually, meaning that this is something you do from the very start and never really stop doing. I've been talking about giving pilot users training, but when the rollout is happening, all users should have some knowledge about how to use Teams. General tutorials and guides can be given to users already before the actual rollout and also during the pilot. But the result of the pilot also sets the way of working in place and reflects the more in-depth training. Okay, so training can be done in so many ways, also depending on a numerous kind of factors. So, for example, how many people need training? The location of users, are they spread across many sites, offices, or even countries? Do you have training tools in place already that you use? And you should preferably use channels for training that users already use. You're of course not limited to only one channel of training, but you can use several. So yet again, Microsoft have put in a great effort in creating training material for Microsoft Teams as well. So evaluate what kind of channels to use here. For example, you can start off by sending out some basic how-to emails to your users. And if Yammer is used in your organization, make some posts about the rollout there. This also goes for general communication about the overall implementation, of course. So you can choose any of these kinds of several channels to get your users both involved during communication, but also put training content in there as well. If you have a learning management system in place, that's a great way of doing training for your end users as well. And in most cases, it's really easy to set up courses and add pre-made content to them, having them up and running in basically no time. Then there are classroom trainings that are very effective, but they also require a set location where users need to go. The scheduling to fit many users at the same time, place and time as well. And this might not be a viable solution for large organizations with lots of users in many locations. But there's also the possibility to have classroom trainings for some group of users, for example, your champions, which I will discuss soon. Also remember that when Microsoft Teams is rolled out, Teams is a great channel itself to get information and training content out to your users. As with communication, training should never really stop, and so make sure your users are aware of new features and know how to use them as well. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Champions program. So early in the process of your implementation, you should consider to set up a Champions program. So first of all, what is a Champions program? Or even more important, what is a champion, right? So a champion is someone that will help you spread the word, the knowledge, and the hype around the service or product you are implementing. They can also be your ears and eyes during and after rollout to get a sense of your users' thoughts and feelings as well. So you need to get the right people and set up a team of champions. A champion usually looks like a person that is very keen about trying out new things, and in this case, new technology, and are eager to learn and start using it, right? They typically aren't afraid of change and are often someone that other people ask for help about tools and technology. This is, however, no rule or a must, I would say. I often advise customers to find these persons with find persons with other personalities as well, like the people I call the dissenters, users that aren't too happy with change and changing their way of behavior and habits. Maybe they're happy with things as they are and they want to stick with it, right? So if you manage to convince these persons that Microsoft Teams is a great tool and how it can benefit themselves and everyone else, your other users will take notice of this. So another tip is to find these champions from all corners of your organization as well. As I said, they will help you help other users and will be a source of feedback as well. So if you have a reach of all your entire organization here of champions, it will make sure that all voices will be heard and help is always kind of nearby, right? At the same time, they are also your kind of voice as well. When you've decided on the selected group of champions, you need to make sure they get the appropriate training too. They should know Microsoft Teams pretty well, but not limited to only that. They should know the goals of the implementation, the high-level gains as well, and also the personal gains. This way, they also get more invested in the rollout themselves, making them better champions. Also remember collecting, you remember the questions you were supposed to collect during the pilot. So give your champions an answer to these questions, preparing them to answer your users' questions when they arise. Make sure your champions know each other and work together as a team as well. That's also an important part. They can help each other out, share ideas and solutions to obstacles that some might have run into and found a solution to maybe. What better way of doing this is through Microsoft Teams, right? So set up a champions team in Microsoft Teams and create channels for different topics like issues, questions, general information, etc., etc. In here, they can also have recurring meetings where they share feedback and status with each other. If any bigger issues have arisen and how to move forward and so on. You should also be a part of these meetings as well, so you can take action upon the information given if needed as well. Because your champions are all over your organization, all right? So they probably hear what your users are saying. If they're happy or displeased, it's important that you are aware of how your users feel about using Microsoft Teams in order to take the necessary actions for a successful implementation. All right, moving on to step number 6, individual workshops. I've done lots of Microsoft Teams trainings, including classroom trainings. So it's usually about 3 to 4 hours long. And when it's over and people walk out of that classroom door, then what happens? Normally it's business as usual, right? They go back to work and do what they need to do. Therefore, it's also important to time user training in correlation to implementation. So best scenario, users have access to Teams by the time of the trainings. Although even so, when people are busy, they tend to do things as they're used to and are comfortable with, even if they could have been done in a better and faster or more efficient way in Microsoft Teams. So users tend to procrastinate and forget. So you will have of course you have your champions helping you to push users forward, right? But there's still one dilemma. Every team or business unit work in many different ways. They have different tasks overall with different processes, document types, communication, and so on. This means that it will vary a lot on how different business units will utilize Microsoft Teams itself. So when I talk to my customers sometime after my trainings, I find very often that users now have Microsoft Teams up and running. They've started using it. They're using at least various parts of it, but they many times have come to a halt. And this is many times because they have a hard time transforming their old ways of working into doing it with Microsoft Teams instead. There's old processes, maybe file shares with files they don't know how to make a structure of in Microsoft Teams. They've tell me yeah, we've learned Microsoft Planner. We've learned about it, but I can't really figure out how to use it in the best possible way. And I just want to say here, business critical processes ought to be a part of the pilot as well, of course. So, but there are often lots of other more team specific ones as well. So what do we do about this? What I do and have seen very good results from is to do individual workshops for the various business units. So if there are teams working in very similar ways, they can be part of the same workshop, of course. So sometime after training, I reach out to the different functions within the organization and their team managers and try to schedule these workshops with them. I mean, often it's enough with 1 to 2 hours. And most important is that the users attending knows about their team's processes, their ways of working, and so on. While they're in these workshops, I ask them simple questions. How is it going? Are you using Teams? What obstacles are you running into? I ask them about their specific processes and help them do this with Microsoft Teams right there and then. Sometimes it requires, of course, me to take notes and follow up later on, but most often users just need that final push in to start using Teams fully. One issue I run into often in these workshops is with files, actually. Commonly, they have a file share where the team used to store all the files, and they are now struggling with how to move these files to Microsoft Teams. It's usually just a smaller, it's a matter of creating appropriate channels in their team in Teams that corresponds to their folders and the file share, for example. Then they can migrate these files from themselves. But things like these keeps them from doing their day-to-day work in Teams now. So I try to solve their problems and optimize their workflow, answer specific questions till they feel secure enough to make the leap. So yet again here, I've seen some great results and increase in usage after these workshops. All right, so now I've come to the final step, which is measuring usage. Microsoft offers several usage reports that give you information about how and how much Teams is used in your organization. And keeping track of the overall usage during and especially after the implementation is valuable to make sure that your users are using Teams in a sustainable way. So you don't really want Microsoft Teams to be the new kind of cool tool of the month, and then your users go back to the old ways and behavior, right? So by checking in on one of these reports, you make sure that Teams is being used as planned and that usage increase over time. The rollout of Teams might have been very successful, right? But it's the outcome of it all that really matters. If by any means usage is decreasing, you should take action as soon as possible and find out why and in what way. Meet with your champions and hear out what they think. Hopefully you've been communicating with them before all this usage dropped and found out about any errors, misconfigurations, or unhappy users and taken action upon it. But things can change, and therefore it's important to watch the actual statistics now and then. How often may depend, but I'd recommend looking at the reports every once or other week, just after rollout, and maybe some with less frequency later on. It often takes a while for users to change their way of work and change their behavior overall, but after a while, it kind of sticks. So you can find a few reports in the usage reports section in the admin portal. These, as well as a few others, can also be found in Microsoft Teams Admin Center under Analytics and Reports. This includes usage activity on a user level, which team clients users are logging into, and also furthermore PSTN and live event usage, and the total activity in Microsoft Teams as well. How to use and react to these reports, of course, depends on your initial goals on how Teams should be used. So take, for example, the Teams clients report. If you have communicated to your users to use the mobile client due to the fact that you may have many mobile users, right? And see that most of the users don't really do this, you might have a problem to solve. It could be due to insufficient information, poor training, or other reasons. So you need to work this out with your adoption stakeholders and champions. So from the Teams client itself, the team owners themselves can also get analytics reports based on their team's activity. They can see active users and the total number of messages and activity over time. This can, of course, be fun fact for the owners, but can also be part of your kind of adoption strategy as well. Many organizations I know put in a responsibility upon team owners to make sure communication and collaboration is kept within teams. This report makes it easier for them to acknowledge active users and overall activity. And as a suggestion, why not just like give a most active user of the month award, right? Do some fun for your users. So now we come to the summary. So I'm just gonna quickly summarize all these steps for you here. So I've told you in the beginning, each one of these steps require more or less time and effort to accomplish. So first, step one, I talked about making up your plans and strategies about the implementation. Finding the correct stakeholders to get necessary information is important to the implementation, creating as much value as possible for users. Make sure to get answers to the correct questions relevant to your organization. Conduct workshops and get to know the why, the short-term as well as the long-term goals, the pains, the quick wins. And create your adoption strategy based on this information. Next is making sure your plans and how to use Teams as well as current configuration actually works out for your organization before the full implementation. So conducting a pilot to test everything out is important for many reasons. It's much harder to change and adjust once everything is rolled out everywhere, right? And users will have a worse experience, hence making adoption harder to accomplish. Also, training is affected based on your users' way of working, which often are changed and are adjusted during the pilot itself. So the key to a successful pilot is finding the users best fitted to participate in the pilot program. So find the best scenarios to try out. If business, once again here, I want to point out if business critical processes are part of the implementation strategy, make sure to pilot these processes. And also try out quick wins and find all those things that doesn't work or can be improved. Collect feedback all the time and make adjustments. They are huge parts of a pilot. So just make it work. Step 3 here was communication. So communicating with users from the very start throughout the implementation is so important in so many ways. It makes users feel more involved. It creates the interest and curiosity needed to make users excited for Microsoft Teams. It also prevents confusion and resistance based upon users feeling forced into using the product itself, right? So let users know about Microsoft Teams, why you're implementing it, when and how. Tell them the benefits, including how they themselves can benefit from it in their day-to-day work. Number 4 was continuous learning. And as with communication, learning is something your users should do in several steps all through the implementation. These two might intertwine, of course, but while communication focuses more on informing about the product and about the implementation itself, training teaches them how and when to use Microsoft Teams. Plan for how you will train users and which through channels training should be conducted. So do you need to use your own custom-made training material, for example, or use existing tools and content? Also use commonly used channels to reach users with your content, as well as classroom training, learning management systems, and so on and so on. Also use your champions as super users and make learning something that happens on a daily basis, right? Without proper training, there's a big chance that users don't do things the way that you intended. They might be confused and give up, resulting in switching back to old behavior and way of working. And this is something you don't want, right? So training is not only about the tools and features, but also about helping them change their mindset. This is really important. People are creatures of habits, right? And are used to do their way of work and tasks in certain ways. And using cloud services is different in many ways to what people are used to do and might be hard to grasp and understand. Users can be insecure about storing their data in the cloud, for example, and not really sure where it actually are stored and how to reach it. Making sure your users get a better understanding of this are equally important, right? And yet again, Microsoft Teams is an evolving service, so make sure users are getting continuous information and training even after the implementation itself. About the Champions program, Champions are used to create the hype, help out with communication, training, push your users into change of behavior, and to collect feedback also, of course. By having the right people throughout the organization, gotten the proper training, will make user adoption easier and much more effective. Setting up a champions team and make sure they communicate and help each other out as well for feedback from end users. So actually proper actions can be taken. They are your ears and eyes. I mentioned this in the beginning. Not in a it can sound creepy, but not in an espionage way, but rather making sure users are heard and can make a difference. Because they're also an extension of your own arm, right? The second last step was individual workshops. Training for the masses are usually very general, right? Of course, training can be custom fitted to your own organization, but most times the various departments and business units also have their own way of working. I've seen numerous times users had training but still struggle to fit this into their own team's processes and way of working. So by scheduling short workshops with their team responsibles and help them set up their teams in Microsoft Teams often make a huge difference in them actually start using Microsoft Teams fully. Ask them about their way of working, their processes and pains. Help them out doing things in Teams and solve their issues if possible. As I said before, Teams isn't always the solution. Also, I see users trying to do the same old things now, but in Microsoft Teams. So this is also an opportunity for them to review their way of working and make them more productive, effective, and beneficial for themselves. Overall, my experience with these workshops are that they are very appreciated and beneficial for the different teams. Just that kind of final kick in to start using Microsoft Teams for real. Final step was measuring usage. I covered this not long ago, so I'll just keep this short here. Measuring your organization's usage makes sure that you are aware of sudden drops. If in this case you need to figure out why this is happening and do something about it, right? It could also be encouraging, seeing usage increasing over time as well. Depending on results, it also affects on how continuous communication and training should be handled as well. Go through the different reports that applies to your rollout, more often during and shortly after, a little less frequent. Then maybe not as often. Just do it on a regular basis. Try to keep an eye on the usage. Is a very good thing to do. All right, that was all my 7 steps. Before I finish off, I just want to do a little bit of a shout out of the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference in the March 23 to 25, Las Vegas, Nevada. Please see the link there for more information. You can go to that. Also, if you have the opportunity, please consider donating to the following charity relief funds. There's United Way. You can see the link there. There's also the International Medical Corps. It's very appreciated in these times and very much needed. With that, I thank you so much for joining me, and please stay safe. Of course, also please send in the feedback links for the event itself, and also my session is down there. You can also scan the QR code to come directly to the form. Other than that, I thank you so much for attending. I hope it was informative for you, and please stay safe.